we left Mumbai airport, we stepped outside, and the only way I can describe it, it was like this full impact and recognition and resonance of coming home. Again, it was like everything pranammed, everything fell down and bowed to the ground. And it was like, and I had this breath that was leaving me, and it was finally, I'm home. I'm home. And I was.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel within. I am deeply honored to have Julie Hoyle with me today, and we will be exploring her spiritual awakening and just her journey thus far. Hi, Julie, and welcome to the channel within. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Mira. Me too. It's an honor. And yeah, let's just dive in.
Yeah, so can we talk about early childhood?
Yeah. So just for context, I was born in the UK into a really working class family with no kind of orientation towards spirituality. Even though my father was a Catholic, he was kind of a lapsed Catholic. He never went to church. And my mother was, on a good day, she was an agnostic, and on a bad day, she was an atheist. So that was the context. And, from a large family, there were 6 kids. And I was really the only one that I knew of in my family that had any orientation towards, spiritual kind of leanings. And I would have out of body experiences, psychic phenomenon, visitations from angelic beings. I would know and feel things about people, before they even spoke. And, from the minute I was born, I remember always having lucid dream experiences and astral travels outside of the body. And the thing is I really believed that that was everybody's way of being. I just naturally thought that that was, the way we are and the way we communicate, and that the mind and the body was not who we are. And then it came as a bit of a shock. I think it was around 7 or 8 when I realized that that wasn't true for most people, everybody in my environment. And so I learned to keep my mouth shut because I was sent to a Catholic school, and we were taught from a very early age, you are a sinner and you are born in sin. And then everything I was taught really spoke to the priest or the nun being the voice for God, and that, they were sort of the intermediary. And here I was having these direct experiences. So I was kind of afraid to say anything. And I thought I'd get into trouble, or I thought I was weird, or, I didn't, as a child, I couldn't figure any of that out. So I just kept quiet about these things. And the whole time growing up, I was having this incredible kind of psychic phenomenon happening around me and in me.
I have a question about the early childhood experiences because I know later on it became universal from different traditions, the
Yes.
visitations. However, in your early childhood, was it only Christian based, or did the visitations or the experiences, were they universal as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It tended to fit, I would say, that kind of the Christian format or context. As an example, when I was around 8, I felt myself leaving my body, which was a usual thing. I'd fall asleep, and then I would exit through the heart chakra. And I can use this language now, but then I couldn't. I'd leave through the heart or through the third eye. And I was drawn into the garden. And my grandfather was there, and there were 2 angelic beings standing beside him. And I started to cry, and he said to me, "Don't cry. I came to say goodbye." And I knew that he was leaving. And he said, "Be a good girl, take care of your brother and your brothers and your sister." And then he said goodbye, and he left. And I came back to my body and woke up that it was 5 a.m. and I couldn't get back to sleep. But I went to school that day, and then when I came home in the afternoon, my mom said to me, "Be quiet. Your dad's really upset. Your granddad died this morning at 5 a.m." And so those were the kinds of experiences I was having as a child. That and, amazing sort of psychic phenomenon and visitations from angelic beings. But the thing I do want to say as well that really kind of underpins all of this is that I knew from a very early age I was looking for someone. I had to find someone. I couldn't detail who that was, but I knew that that person was not someone in my immediate environment, and that I would have to leave that environment to find him or her. Now, I couldn't have put that into kind of words then, but it was this drive that just was propelling me forward. And another really pivotal event that happened when I was around, again, I was around 8 or 9, and I was sitting at home with my father, and we were watching a National Geographic program. And the program was detailing the amazing feats that Indian, yogis were performing. And they were doing all these incredible asanas and so on and so forth. And then in part of the program, they took this really old yogi who was sitting cross-legged. They put him in a sealed box, and they wrapped chains around the box, and they dropped the box in the deep part of a swimming pool. And they had all these things, electrodes and things on his head, and they were monitoring his heart rate and his pulse and his vital signs and all of those things. And he was under the water for a ridiculous amount of time. Off the top of my head, I think it was like 45 minutes to an hour, which really defied the physiological responses, in any sort of normal human being to be able to do that. Anyway, they lifted him, they brought him out, opened the box, and he just stood up and walked away as if it was nothing. And I remember my father turning to me and he said, "Do you believe it? Do you think it's really true?" And there was something inside of me that just rose up. I recognized, there was something in this yogi I recognized. And I said, "Yes, it's true. It's absolutely true." And it was from that point on, I had this really powerful drive and inclination to want to study yoga. And of course, in those days, back in when would it be, the late 60s, 70s or something like that, there wasn't the same kind of access to anything really spiritual or mystical or yogic kind of practices in my environment anyway. But I went into town and I found the only book I could find in a bookstore was Wake Up to Yoga. And it was just a little thin little volume, but it wasn't detailing the deeper meaning of what yoga is all about. It was really just detailing the asanas. So I took the book and I practiced doing hatha yoga through this book. I would kind of like set up a little mat behind the sofa in the living room. We had a very small house with 8 people in it, so it was really difficult for me to be able to do any of the practices. I couldn't meditate anywhere. There was no quiet space, but I would do these asanas, and I kept that going really, from the age of about 13 or 14 and through until I was in my 30s. It was like I knew it. I felt it in my bones. There was something in it that there was a resonance and there was a recognition. I couldn't have said, I've done this before in those in that time, but there was definitely this feeling that I knew it really well, and I was returning to something I'd done before. So that was really what underpinned everything. And then what happened was, at a certain stage, even though I kept the yoga going through, from when I was about 13, 14, all the way through to current day, I remember when I was around 14 or 15, something like that. And I, had woken up to the realization that not everybody perceived the world and different states of being in the same way that I did. But I remember looking up at the sky and saying, "I cannot do this. I just can't do this anymore. It's too much responsibility." Because I wanted to be a normal teen. I didn't want to be the weirdo, the one that, it just felt really strange. And so I just looked up to God and said, take it away. And so those gifts were kind of minimized. They weren't as strong. They didn't entirely go away, but they were softened. And then I was kind of a normal teen, and then I went to college and, did the normal things. But even then, beneath all of that, I was very good at putting on a show and acting, trying to act normal. But there was something deeper than that that kept calling me. And I felt discontent with the things of the world. I knew they wouldn't bring me happiness. I knew it didn't matter how, famous, wealthy, successful I became. That was not what I was looking for. There was something much more profound and much more valuable that I needed to find. And I knew that I would be able to recognize it in someone, this someone that I was hoping to meet and looking for, and I would know straight away. And that held to be true.
That's fascinating. So can we talk about that lucid dream next then, or?
Yes. So again, for context, what happened was I met my husband. I trained as a teacher because I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. We were offered positions in the Bahamas. We came to the Bahamas. And, in most people's minds, you're living in the Bahamas, you're living the dream. And it really is. It's very beautiful. Palm trees, beautiful ocean. We were meeting, amazing people. I would go to these cocktail parties under the palm trees, and I would really hope that I would meet this person. And I would look in the eyes of whoever I was meeting, and then I'd come away disappointed. So that went on for some time. And we were very busy. We bought a boat. I was painting on silk. I was having exhibitions. It was we had a nice life. But then I hurt my back in an exercise class, and I ended up with 2 bulging discs. And it was really agonizing. And so I was on bed rest. I was off work and I was on bed rest for about 2 months, something like that, 2.5 months. And I got to see all these doctors and specialists, and really nobody could help me other than giving me medication. And what happened is during that time, I had this epiphany, and I realized that the back condition, spoke to closing down the gifts I'd been given all those years before. And then with that recognition, I started having lucid dreams of my grandmother who had died, when I was around 17 or 18. She started coming in dreams and she said to me, pray, you must pray, pray. And because I trusted her and I knew that the dream was real, it wasn't just a dream, I then began to revisit the idea of there being a God, because I had questioned that because of my experiences at Catholic school. So I essentially said, okay, if there's a God there and you can heal this back condition, then I promise I'll start going to church and I'll learn to meditate, because I'd always wanted to learn to meditate rather than trying to do it on my own. I had never had much success. So literally, it was like a miraculous recovery. I mean, it took time, but I started to feel better. And then a friend came to visit me to do little gentle massage work. And she just happened to tell me there was a meditation group that was meeting literally half a mile from where I lived. So I said, okay, as soon as I'm well enough, I'm going to go to this meditation group. So that happened, and I went, and the people I met were wonderful, lovely, professional people, which was important to me because I didn't want to kind of be with flaky, you know what I mean. So
I get it.
yes, so I was introduced to meditation. It was a very small group. We were given the mantra Om Namah Shivaya. Om is the primordial sound. For those people that don't know, Om is the primordial sound. And Nama means I bow to. And Shiva or Shivaya is supreme consciousness. So you're essentially saying in simple terms or in Western terms, I bow to the truth that's within me, the bigger truth, the supreme self, however you want to articulate that. And so I really love the mantra. I loved the chanting. It just felt very natural to me. But when it came to meditating, I just couldn't meditate. Even though the meditations were only 20 minutes, I'd close my eyes and my thoughts would be running rampant. I couldn't sit still. And after about 2 minutes, I'd open my eyes and look around the room and think, how come she's sitting so still? And I wonder what he's thinking. And, how do they do it? All of that. So what happened was I think I went 2 or 3 or 4 times. And then after the third time, or fourth time, I just said, I can't do this. It doesn't work for me. I'm happy it works for other people, but just I'm not coming back. As much as I like the people in the group, it's pointless if I'm not able to meditate. And then I went home that evening thinking, I'm satisfied that I gave meditation a go. At least I'm happy with that, even though I failed miserably. So I thought that was the end of it. Little did I know. So what happened was that night I woke up in a dream, and usually what would happen is I would wake up in a dream and realize this is a dream and I am dreaming. And in the dream, I found myself, I knew I was in India, even though I hadn't ever visited India. I recognized this place that I'd been to many times before. I was in rural India. I was with a group of yogis. We were walking up a hill and we were walking towards this low kind of cinder block building. And it was sitting on top of the hill. And there was a light on, the doors were open. And we walked in, and I was walking alongside this woman I just recently met at the meditation center. Her name is Cheryl. And so we walk up to the top of the hill. We enter in the back of the building, and I see sitting on a low tucket at the front of the hall was this yogi. He was sitting with his eyes closed. He had a big belly, sitting with a white loincloth on. And just the energy that was emanating out of him was the most profound, intense, radiant energy I'd ever felt in my life. And it was like the minute my eyes were laid on this being, everything pranamed or bowed down to him in reverence and in recognition. And I knew that he, without doubt and question, he was the being, he's the great being that I had always searched for. And my seeking was over. It was done. And I knew that this being was a form of God. And he had united with God. And I don't know, I wouldn't have been able to put it into those words then, but this was this recognition and feeling I felt in my heart when I saw him. So the person that was with me said, Cheryl, she said, put your mat on the, she's whispering, put your mat on the floor, lie down and repeat the mantra. So I did. I lay down on the floor and closed my eyes and started repeating the mantra. And after literally 1 or 2 repetitions, I felt a light tap on the top of my head. And I knew without question that the great being sitting at the front of the hall, and let me just say, I didn't know his name, I didn't know who he was, but I knew that he had, without moving, had somehow tapped the top of my head. And with that tap, the most incredibly potent and powerful energy started to course through my entire being. It moved really, really rapidly and intensely, and it was going round and round and round every single cell. And the more I was repeating Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, the more intense the energy was getting. And it was becoming really, really, really hot, really fiery. And as I was repeating it, I could feel my body was beginning to levitate off the ground. And it was floating up, I'm guessing 5 or 6 feet or something like that. And I realized that I was holding on and really clinging on to the mantra and repeating it as strongly as I could, because I knew I wouldn't be able to hold this energy too much longer. because the intensity and the fierceness of it was so incredible. And at a certain point, I started to smell smoke. And it felt like my subtle body was going to, burst into flame. And at that point, I knew that somehow this great being had released and was allowing me, and I was going with it, to kind of fall down. And it was, the only way I can put it is, I felt myself falling through time and space. And then I landed back in my physical body. And as I was coming through the heart chakra, as I was coming back into the body, I realized that the physical body hadn't been breathing. There'd been this complete just cessation of breath. And as I landed in, I just went, "Ah!" and took a breath. And then I sat up in bed, and I woke, because it was so loud, I woke my husband. And he sat up and he said, "What happened? What happened?" And I said, "I don't know, but my life will never be the same again." And those words have proven to be incredibly prophetic. And what happened then was that, and I had no context for any of it, but what happened was I was just filled with the most incredible energy. I felt like I'd got 10 million volts, plugged into me. So I get up, 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it was, and I just go into the kitchen and I'm just cleaning and just, wiping everything and just doing this massive big purge in our home. So I kept that going till it was time to shower and go to work. And so, I get up and go to, drive off to work, and I start driving, and I haven't gone more than a few yards. And I feel this emotion, immense emotion pouring through me. And I just start sobbing my heart out. It was uncontrollable. I had to pull over and just cry and cry and cry and cry. I did not know what was going on. I didn't know what had hit me, but I knew that what was happening linked to what had happened in this dream. So then I pull myself together, start driving again, and then I'm laughing hysterically. I couldn't control it. I was just laughing, laughing, laughing. I was having to pull over again and calm down. And that's how it went the whole drive to school. So then I get to school, and there's a whole series of events there where I'm kind of prompted to go and take a look at a shoe sale that's going on. And I go to this at lunchtime. I go to a shoe sale to check out some shoes that are on offer. There was nothing there. And then I remembered that there was Unity Bookstore, which is a church I used to go to, was opposite this place where I'd gone to look for shoes. And I walk in there looking for a book to explain what had happened, in the dream. And I couldn't find anything. And then I heard a voice behind me saying, "Oh, Julie." And then I turn around, and it's Cheryl, who was in the dream with me the night before. And I said, "Oh my God, Cheryl, you'll never guess what. I had this dream with you," and, blah, blah, blah. So she said, "Well, come to my house later and I'll explain everything." She also said, "I want you to know that I haven't been to this bookstore in years, but I got a prompt to come this morning, and here you are." So anyway, to cut a long story short, I went to Cheryl's house later that afternoon. She sat me down. She said, "I have something to show you." So she goes into a back room, comes out with a book, and she shows me this book. And the title of the book is Play of Consciousness by Swami Muktananda. And when she gives me the book, and I open the book, and right there in the early pages is a photograph of this being who'd been in my dream the night before. And I said to her, "Oh my God, this is the being who was in my dream." And she said, "Oh, this is so profound. This being is Bhagavan Nityananda of Ganeshpuri. He is a great Siddha master, and he is renowned for giving Shakti Path throughout India. And even now, even though he'd taken Mahasamadhi, or he'd left his body, probably when I was like maybe 5 or 6 or something. I was very, very young. And but still he comes to beings, to seekers in dreams, to give initiation. So my understanding, and I found this out much later, is that in terms of beliefs, and it's more than a belief, obviously, because it's my direct experience. But great yogis say that one's spiritual energy is lying dormant at the base of the spine. And it's almost like a coiled serpent coiled around 3.5 times. And it's this energy sleeping until there's an awakening. And an awakening can be given by a master yogi, by a great siddha or a Shakti Path guru. And Shakti's energy, and Pat is the descent. So it's the descent of grace that awakens one's sleeping Kundalini energy, the Shakti that's lying dormant. So with that tap on the head, Nityananda awakened this energy that was sleeping in the base of the spine, and it started to move very forcefully throughout my being. And this, this is the way it works with most people, that there's some kind of an event that awakens its energy. And the thing is that once it starts to awaken, it purifies the chakras, and it'll move through these knots, these old beliefs, conditioning, fear, and all the other things that prevent us from recognizing the truth of who we are. And so, and again, I knew none of this. I was raised as a Catholic. I mean, all of this was absolutely kind of brand new to me. There was no context to understand any of this, but I learned through direct experience. And so what happened was, the minute that I realized this descent of grace had happened, I tried to kind of do a bit of research, but there wasn't that much available. But I would have I'd have my own experiences of meetings with great beings, astral plane visitations. I would have all kinds of strange phenomenon happening at home, where light bulbs would burst, fans were spinning and they weren't even plugged in, the microwave stopped working. So all this kind of the electrical kind of things that I had at home were going crazy because of this awakening, and because the energy that had been released through Shakti Path, through the descent of grace from Bhagavan Nityananda of Ganeshpuri.
With this transformation from your upbringing, the context that you described earlier, to this acceptance or knowing of ancient Eastern traditions, you said with the rise in the Kundalini, what is that grace that it helped you to work through limitations? How difficult was that, or was it instant where you just knew?
No, it was really difficult. I mean, I'm going kind of jump forward in the story. But what happened was, for the first, I'd say 10, 15 years, it was like I was in bliss, because I was having out-of-body experiences, angelic visitations. I would be in lucid dreams where I would meet Ananda Maimar, who's a very well-known great being. I would have visitations with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who I'd never studied Buddhism. I didn't know anything about Buddhism. I had visitations with the Sufi masters, Mrs. Irena Tweedy and Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. I would meet Native American shamans in lucid dreams who would give initiation. I would meet other master yogis. I mean, in one lucid dream, I remember again, I found myself in India. I'm walking along a dusty path. This great being is walking towards me. I didn't know who he was. I could just recognize his state. And he said to me, I can give initiation. Would you like? And I said, yes, please. And he took his thumb and pressed it, my third eye. And I was filled with amazing energy. And I said to him, please tell me, what is your name? And he said, Swami Ram Tirth. And I'd never heard of Swami Ram Tirth. I didn't know who he was. But later I did research and discovered that he's a Siddha. He was a great mathematician. He's well known in India. And so, this happened. These kinds of events were part of the course. It was just part of what was happening. And Nityananda told me to keep quiet, not tell. I mean, I'd share a few things within the group, the meditation group, but he said to keep these things quiet. And I did for many, 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 many years. And then at a certain point, my husband and I were invited to go to be on staff at the ashram in India that was related to Nityananda. So we went there, and I thought I would be having even more amazing experiences and, be in bliss. And it was the opposite, because I was thrown into doing shadow work. And again, I'd never heard of shadow work. I didn't know what it was. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. But the point is that when you have, and this is true for anyone, when you have a radical or subtle awakening, it doesn't matter, but when you wake up to the realization, I'm not my mind, I'm not my body, I'm not my emotions, I am that, I am beyond that, you still have to work with the psyche, because there's all your conditioning that's still in place, the baggage that you've inherited, all the things that limit you, the beliefs, all of those things that you've taken on as a child. And so I was kind of forced into doing that work without really knowing what I was doing. But somehow the right people would show up, the right books would show up, and I would get prompts to do self-inquiry. And that was essentially how I started working with the shadow and dealing with the things that kind of stand in the way of the ultimate recognition, self-recognition.
That's really beautiful. And I love the way you had these awakening experiences and lucid dreams because, when you think about it, are we dreaming when we're asleep or are we dreaming when we're awake? Because I have not had exposure to Bhagavan Nityananda, but I've read more on Yogananda. And, he said we are in God's big dream. And then we were reminded also in that nursery rhyme, row, row, row your boat, that life is but a dream as well. So
Yes,
those
yes.
experiences are are what is so much more real.
Well, look, the thing that I really love is that when I started to recognize and realize the gift I'd been given and the profundity of my experiences, and also when I was being pushed to share, because I had no intention of writing or speaking about these things because I've been told to be quiet. But at a certain point, I was told to start speaking and sharing, which I did. But the thing is that you realize that so much of our suffering, or all of our suffering, really is about not knowing who we are and not recognizing what is already here. And one of the things I remember really clearly is many years ago is one of the master yogis that I studied with in one of the lucid dreams told a story about a seeker who had gone to a king, and the king had said to the seeker, and he'd sent out a proclamation, who can tell me which is real, the waking state or the dream state? And this seeker had gone to him with the same question. And so he and the king were trying to figure this out. So the king sent this proclamation out, and everybody was coming towards the king saying, the waking state is the real state. And the king wasn't quite buying it. And then other people say the dream state is the real state. And the king wasn't quite buying it. And then all of a sudden, this old person, this kind of handicapped person who wasn't, able to function very well physically, he came before the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, neither the waking nor the dream state is real. There are four states. There's the waking state, there's the dream state, there's the state of deep sleep, and there is Turiya, that which is the fourth. And it's that which is the fourth that is the real state. It's that which can see and recognize. For example, when you wake up in the morning, you say, "Oh, I slept well." Well, there must be something There must be some state that you have access to and privy to that is able to tell you slept well. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. So it was that story that made me realize, oh my God, this is absolutely true. Because whenever I, would read the words, let's say, of a Fizz or a great poet, mystical poet, or I would read the words or the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, for example, a great yogi. There's a place within my being that would always recognize there'd be a resonance. There's a place prior to the story. There's a place prior to any event or anything that happens that is completely still. It's completely unmoving. It doesn't come and go. It never changes. And this is the truth of who I am. This is what recognizes truth. The self recognizes itself. The self wakes up to itself. So all of these states of being, the waking state, the dream state, the state of deep sleep, by their very kind of essence, are fluctuating. They're subject to change. But there is something that never changes. And that is Turiya, the fourth state, that which does not come and go, that which is never affected. And so what I realized is, after many years of seeking, because, that after Shakti Path, I became an ardent seeker and kept that going for 30 years or so. And then I realized, oh, seeking is an obstacle. I knew everything just fell away. I stopped seeking. And then I recognized what had always been here. And this is true for everybody. Everybody recognizes truth. There's a resonance, there's a felt sense, there's this beautiful quality of authenticity that just shines through, that we all feel. We know what this feels like. And so essentially that's the work that I do in the world now, in terms of what I've been prompted to share and speak to.
I love. I heard you speak about it and loved that. What other work do you do for what other work do you do?
What other work?
Yeah.
Well, I let me just say, I teach full time as well. I mean, I've never people have this fantasy, because I live in the Bahamas, I sit under a palm tree and meditate all day. That's why I'm so connected in, and nothing could be further from the truth. I've always had a day job. I've always worked. I teach, art and design in a high school, private school. But essentially, I do the same work with them that I do with the adults and the spiritual seekers that come to me. It's about creating a safe space, getting out of the mind, feeling into what feels right for you, and honoring your own intuitive knowing and living true to that. So, that's a big part of my work. I also an author. I've authored 8 books. Again, that was not on my plan. I had no desire to be an author or anything, but I had a lucid dream, and a great being came in one of the dreams, and she said to me, "When are you writing the book?" And I said, "What am I supposed to write about?" And she just kind of gave me one of those looks and then walked away. And as she's walking away, she looked over her shoulder and she said, "It's important to understand your own journey." And so, after that felt like a command. It felt like I had no choice but to write the book. But I remember waking up the following morning and thinking to myself, I'll do it. I'll write the book, but I'm not writing a single word if it comes from ego. I'm just not interested, and I just left it alone. And then 3 or 4 weeks went by, and one morning I was sitting looking at the palm trees, and I started to hear it, and I just wrote it down. So it was like it was dictated. And that was really how, authoring books began. And the same holds true with the work I do online. So I do, one-on-one sessions with people who feel like they've exhausted seeking and they're tired of seeking. There's a weight to it. So I really just hold these sessions and give them pointers so that they can start to see clearly from the place of their own authentic beingness that doesn't need anything adding to it. So I do that, and I also work with people on looking at the shadow and looking at shadow integration and the things that are holding them back and old beliefs. And then I have my own YouTube channel, and I also, I'm also often interviewed on different podcasts and different channels as well. So, I'm really quite busy.
When you mentioned the extra energy you had after the diksha, or I was thinking that that really shows that we are spiritual beings here having that human experience. I did hear you speak about your students also having experiences themselves because of being in the proximity. So if you could talk about that, because that also is so beautiful and fascinating.
Yeah, so I'll give you a few anecdotes that I think speak to that. So this was in the 90s. This is a long time ago. I used to teach in a government school here in Nassau, and they're not very well funded, really oversubscribed. We had very large classes, and primarily students come from a very sort of orthodox Christian background. But what would happen is I would often have, oftentimes more boys than girls actually, would ask if they could come and sit in the art room at lunchtime. As one student put it, my spirit feels comfortable in here. So I said, yes, of course you can. Please come, anytime you want to come sit and eat and or just hang out and feel free. So that would happen. And then I would have boys oftentimes coming to ask questions or want to, do something in the art room. And they would often come and they would do this. And they would pranam. And that is so far outside of the kind of the Christian orientation. But that would happen again and again. And it wasn't like I was modeling it for them to learn from me. I never did any of that because I respected where I worked. So, and I didn't introduce any of those things. So that would happen. And then another time there was a boy in the art room who asked if he could help me put up a display. I said yes, but we need to clean this board first because the board's dusty. So I said, just take a cloth and wet it down and then just wipe it for me. So I was busy doing something, and he takes the cloth and he's doing these circular motions. And the whole time he was doing the circular motions, he was going, Om, Om, Om. And again, that was completely, beyond anything he would have heard at his own church or any place else. And then, in addition to those kinds of things, I was seeing artwork that was becoming filled with these kinds of mystical images that still happen now. I'd see peacock feathers, I'd see, Om signs, I would see these images and colors and forms that related to students having their own awakenings. And the other
So
thing that,
fortunate. They're so
yeah,
fortunate.
yeah, and the other thing I do want to share is I had several lucid dreams, but one really stands out. Again, this was the late 90s, where I woke up in the dream. I realized this is a dream and I'm dreaming. I'm outside of the art room, and there was two big metal doors that were locked, with a big chain and a big padlock. And I opened the door, and the door swung open, and Bhagavan Nityananda of Ganeshpuri is sitting on my desk, huge. His form is absolutely huge, filling the space. And I'm hearing Om Namah Shivaya just pouring out of him and resonating in this space. And I just did this sort of pranam. I was beside myself. I was really excited. And I realized his space, his awakening power, his energy is filling this art room, which is why the students come to spend time there. And then he looked at me, smiled, and he shook his head a little, and then he stood up and he walked off and he went through the door, through the art room, and I watched him as he's walking away, and all these students were following him. And I realized oh my gosh, he has me working in this place in order for his Shakti to be able to touch these students. And I've seen evidence of that going forward because I often bump into students, years later, and they'll say, oh my God, Miss Julie, when I was taking art with you, I didn't say anything, but I was having these dreams. And, they're telling me these things that were happening. And so I've seen the long-term effect of his grace, which has been, pouring out without, and obviously I can't take credit for any of that. This is all to do with the grace of the Siddhas and the awakening power, which has no limits. And it moves to those who are looking for and longing to awaken to the truth of who they are. And that's the truth of it.
That's beautiful, so beautiful. I do have a question with regards to you and your connection with Bhagavan Nityananda. Clearly, this have gone on in past lives as well, and you did talk about uh, taking a peek into your past lives. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
I did do a past life regression, and I remember, in this past life, I saw myself kind of work. I was in an Eastern Bloc country. I was working in a factory style setting with beautiful yarns and colors, and I was essentially creating, which I realized related to what I do now because the way I teach art and design is really as a therapeutic model, as a way of helping students connect in with who they are via the creative process. Because the mind, I help them to relax the mind in order to connect with the heart and connect with the soul is the way it works. So I kind of had some understanding through that. And then I also had lucid dreams that were not lucid dreams. They were past life experiences, one of which I saw myself as very poor. I saw bare feet in a field. And, I was a young boy. And I saw a church in the distance. And I was filled with the most incredible pain because I realized in that lifetime, my life came to an early end and an abrupt end with working with farm machinery. And I never was able to realize the self or know God in the way I had longed to know God. I'd just known God through going to a church, but it wasn't enough. And I realized this deep longing had been within me for lifetimes. And then here's another important part of all of this as well is I had a lucid dream, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I woke up in a dream and I saw myself as a very young child. I was 6 or 7, something like that. And I was playing with my dolls in the dirt yard at the back of the house where we were raised. And then I saw this 3 or 4 of the Siddha masters who I'd since met as an adult, coming into my yard and speaking to me and kind of holding me. And I realized that they had been with me through this current life and from other lifetimes. And this has gone on for forever. And the thing too is, I remember when I went to India with my husband in 2001, we left Mumbai airport, we stepped outside, and the only way I can describe it, it was like this full impact and recognition and resonance of coming home. Again, it was like everything pranamed, everything fell down and bowed to the ground. And it was like, and I had this breath that was leaving me, and it was finally, I'm home. I'm home. And I was so, so, so happy. And as challenging as India can be for a Westerner, I just absolutely loved being there. And I recognized that I'd been there before. I knew it in my bones. And coming back to be in the place where Bhagavan Nityananda lived out his final years was the most incredibly profound experience. And it's like I never left. It's like I'm still there, is the best way of putting it.
That's beautiful. Are there any tools that you could offer those listening in terms of the remembrance of our essence?
Yeah. One of the things that I always encourage people is this, don't try and force yourself to sit cross-legged and meditate for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Look at your schedule, look at your responsibilities, and find ways to create space. Don't keep telling yourself time. I don't have time, because we can, we'll always never have time, but just create space in your life to be able to connect in a way that feels authentic for you. So if it's saying the Lord's Prayer, or Hail Mary, or whatever mantra you feel a resonance with, don't turn it into some big thing that you should be doing but you don't do. So keep it really simple. Look at the sky, and connect in a way that feels authentic for you, rather than trying to force it. I mean, one of the stories I really love is with a housewife. She had three, so she was a single parent with three kids. And she went to one of the Siddha masters and said, I've spent, she carved some time out to spend a weekend at retreat, and, done some practices. She said, this is all wonderful. It's great. I feel connected. But when I go home, I know it's going to all fall away, because I just don't have time. I've got three kids to take care of, and it just doesn't work. And so the Siddha master said, do you clean? She said, yes. He said, very good. He said, do you cook? Yes. Very good. He said, do you take care of your children? She said, yes, that's all I do. So he said, very good. So when you're cooking, when you're cleaning, and when you're taking care of the children, repeat your mantra or say your prayer. And that is enough. So I took those words on, I mean, just like, so whenever I was, and especially in the early days, whenever I was peeling potatoes or cleaning or doing anything, I was always repeating the mantra. Even now, even today, when I'm working, I'm repeating the mantra and repeating the mantra and repeating the mantra. Or there's absolute profound silence, and I speak from that place. So, for example, when my students come into the class, I just stand and wait. There's silence, then I'll greet them, and then we have a conversation. So it's these very simple things that are accessible for everybody. It doesn't matter what your age, your belief system, your schedule. It doesn't matter. Everyone has a way of being able to connect in a way that's authentic for him or her.
I
But
really love that because I told you before we started recording that my it was my dad's favorite mantra as well. And when I heard you speak about it, I started saying it.
And the other thing too that I learned is that if you're in a meeting or you're at a bank, waiting, just put your thumb and forefinger into Chin Mudra, right? Which is, what you do when you're meditating, because this kind of then helps to contain the energy. Excuse me, it contains the energy. And you've just very automatically and simply come into this place of stillness and peace. And again, it's so, 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 so simple. And it's easy to forget, but all of these things are accessible for all of us.
Julie, this has been an absolute delight for me. I have three questions I ask everyone. What brings you joy and laughter these days?
Really and truly, it's holding space for others to be able to realize the self and to connect in, and put an end to suffering and put an end to seeking. Whatever that looks like, whether it's with students. I mean, the joy that comes out of my students is so amazing, because they tap into and enter into that silent state within their being. So that really brings me joy. And when I write, and write a book, and then somebody writes back and says, oh my gosh, I bought your book, the first book, especially in Awakened Life, I cried for 3 hours. And what they are detailing is an awakening through reading the book. And years ago, I was told by one of the siddhas that the books would be vehicles for the awakening power. And I've seen evidence of that via many of the messages I've received. So these are the things that bring me the most joy, because I am working in service to the siddhas, the great beings, and in service to the awakening power and to the recognition of the Supreme Self, which is true for everyone.
That's lovely. What would you say to young Julie, who is about to embark on on her greatest adventures?
That she, not that I doubted it, I really didn't, but I would say keep going, because you're not imagining it. It's real. What you know to be true is real.
Beautiful. And what final message or blessings do you have for everyone listening?
I would really encourage you more than anything, which is the primary message of what I speak to, is trust your own inner knowing. Trust what feels right for you and live true to it. Whatever that looks like. Because we're always given these prompts. We're always given these kind of indications, and we feel into truth. We really know what truth is within our own being. But it's so easy to bypass that and get into the mind and kind of doubt and all of those things. But really and truly, it begins with trusting your intuition or your inner knowing, or whatever you want to call that. And if you do, you can't go wrong.
Thanks so much, Julie. I will include links to everything we talked about, including your YouTube channel. And I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. This was an absolute blessing to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much, Mira. This has been great. I really love talking about Bhagavan Nityananda and awakening and all of those things, because the thing I do want to say as well is there's a transmission there's energy in what we're sharing as well that is felt by people. So thank you so much for the invitation.